My parents dragged me to court right after I bought my dream house. When I asked why they were suing their own daughter, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "That house belongs to your sister now, so hand over the keys." They expected me to cry and surrender everything I had worked 10 years to build. They had no idea their greedy lawsuit just handed me the exact weapon I needed to leave them with absolutely nothing. My name is Lauren, 33 years old, and I make a living dissecting lies as a senior financial auditor for a major firm in Atlanta. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to ruthlessly defend yourself against the people who should have loved you the most. It was a crisp Saturday evening. The air in my newly purchased $1.5 million home in Buckhead smelled of fresh paint and expensive catering. I had spent a decade working grueling 80-hour weeks to afford this place. There were no handouts, no trust funds, and no co-signers. I was hosting a housewarming party for 20 of my closest friends and firm partners. Soft jazz played over the smart home speakers, and we were gathered around the massive marble kitchen island, laughing and enjoying the evening when the heavy oak front door unceremoniously swung wide open. The music kept playing, but all conversation in the room instantly died. Standing in my grand foyer was my father, Richard, his face set in a stern, entitled scowl that I knew all too well. Beside him stood my mother, Susan, clutching her designer handbag against her chest as if it were a weapon. Behind them was my younger sister, Brittany. She is 30 years old, currently pregnant with her second child, and was practically glued to her phone, looking ready to go live on social media at any second. And finally, leaning casually against the doorframe, was her husband, Jamal. Jamal is a 32-year-old African-American crypto investment consultant who always wears suits that are entirely too loud and watches that are blindingly shiny. They had not RSVP'd to my party. In fact, they had not even been invited. "Lauren," my father barked, his loud voice carrying easily over the jazz music. He did not greet my guests. He marched straight across the imported Turkish floor tiles, pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket pocket, and slapped it down onto the counter right next to a tray of expensive appetizers. "What is this, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. I did not flinch or back away. I had learned a very long time ago that showing any kind of emotion around my family was a fatal mistake. That my mother interrupted, stepping forward with a sharp and accusatory glare, is a summons. "We filed an injunction this morning. We are placing a constructive trust on this property immediately." My colleagues and friends stared in absolute stunned silence. I slowly reached out and picked up the envelope. The bold black letters at the top of the formal document read Fulton County Civil Court. Richard and Susan versus Lauren. You are suing me. I asked, the sheer absurdity of the statement almost making me laugh out loud. You are suing me for buying my own house. It is not your house, my father stated, his harsh tone brooking absolutely no argument. You used family funds to secure this property, funds that were meant for the collective security of this family. You will be signing the deed over to Brittany and Jamal. They have a new baby on the way, Lauren. They need the space. You are a single woman with no real responsibilities. You do not need a massive 4-bedroom estate in Buckhead. I stared at him. For a brief second, I almost admired their sheer, unadulterated delusion. My sister Brittany finally stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on her small baby bump, adopting a sickeningly sweet tone. Do not make this ugly, Lauren, she sighed, playing the victim flawlessly. Jamal and I have been stressed enough lately. His crypto firm is expanding rapidly, and we need a property that reflects our high-end brand. You know, Dad and Mom always promised me a house when I had my second baby. You just selfishly fast-tracked the funds before we could access them. Your brand. I repeated, my voice dropping to an icy calm that made my mother take a tiny step back. Brittany, I paid the $300,000 down payment from an investment account that I have been funding since before you even figured out how to use ring lights for your social media sponsors. Not a single cent of family money went into this transaction because there is no family money. Jamal chuckled, a low and deeply arrogant sound that grated on my nerves. He stepped further into my house, looking up at the vaulted ceilings. Man, the acoustics in here are nice. Brit, the nursery is going to look great in that east wing. He looked back at me, a smug grin plastered across his face. Look, Lauren, the court already accepted the initial filing. Your assets are tied up right now. Do not be stubborn about this. Pack a bag. We are moving our stuff into the master suite tonight. As if on cue, I noticed two large designer suitcases sitting on the front porch. They had not just come to serve me legal papers. They had come to stage a hostile takeover of my home. You brought luggage, I said, a cold smile touching my lips as I looked at the bags and then back at my father. We are establishing residency while the property is under dispute, my father declared authoritatively, repeating a legal phrase he clearly did not fully understand. My lawyer said, as long as we have a pending claim on the equity, family members can legally occupy the premises to prevent the sale or destruction of the asset. We are not leaving until you hand over the keys and clear out your belongings. Your lawyer, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them, is a complete moron. And if you think I'm going to let you steal the life I built, you are about to learn exactly what happens when you corner a brilliant financial auditor. Jamal laughed again, attempting to push past my shoulder to grab his designer suitcases sitting on the porch. He thought I would back down to save face in front of my colleagues. He was dead wrong. I planted my feet firmly and blocked his path. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and placed the device on speakerphone so everyone in the foyer could hear the dial tone ringing. 911. What is your emergency? A calm voice answered. I kept my eyes locked onto my father's pale face. Yes, dispatcher, I need officers sent to my residence in Buckhead immediately. I have 4 hostile trespassers refusing to leave, and one is attempting to force his luggage inside against my direct orders. Lauren put the phone down. Right now, my mother hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward my managing partner who was watching the spectacle. You do not call the police on family. You are not family, I replied loudly. You are intruders. Yes, dispatcher, I am still here. No, they do not have a key. Yes, I have the deed in my name, and they are attempting an illegal occupation. This is a civil matter, Jamal shouted, stepping aggressively toward me. His smug arrogance vanished in a flash, replaced by volatile panic. You cannot call the cops on a civil dispute. We have paperwork. You have a baseless summons, I corrected him, stepping out of his reach. That gives you zero legal right to occupy my property without a judge issuing an order. And unless you have a signed eviction notice, you are officially committing criminal trespass. Patrol cars are 2 minutes away, the dispatcher announced. No ambulance, I said, maintaining my icy glare on Jamal. But they might need a tow truck if they do not move that pickup truck off my lawn. My father's face contorted with absolute rage. He had always ruled our household with an iron fist, using financial threats to keep everyone in line. He expected me to revert to the terrified teenager who used to hide from his voice. He severely underestimated the woman standing before him today. You are going to deeply regret this, Lauren. My father seethed, his fists clenched tightly. When the judge sees the bank statements we provided, you are going to lose this house, and I am going to make sure you pay our legal fees. I look forward to the discovery phase of this, I replied, crossing my arms. Distant sirens began to wail, cutting through the suburban evening. The sound worked like magic. Jamal lost all his bravado instantly. He grabbed Brittany by the arm, dragging her toward the front steps. Let us go right now. We are not dealing with the cops tonight. Our lawyer will handle this on Monday. But my house, Brittany whined, digging her heels into the porch. Mom said we could move in today. Move your feet! Jamal snapped his eyes wide with a frantic energy. A man with a legitimate legal claim does not run from the police. A man with dangerous secrets does. My parents followed them out, but not before my mother turned back to deliver one last venomous glare. You are completely dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead. Then stop haunting my house, I said. The second they crossed the threshold, I hit the security button on the wall to trigger the smart locks. The heavy door slammed shut, and the deadbolt engaged with a deeply satisfying click. I took a very deep breath, letting my pulse settle into a completely normal rhythm, and left my stunned guests waiting in the living room. I grabbed the manila envelope, retreated to my home office, and shut the door. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold clinical fury. I spread the documents across my desk. The lawsuit was a mess of legal jargon, but the core claim was clear: constructive trust. They alleged I fraudulently transferred $300,000 from a joint family account to purchase this property, and therefore the equity belonged to my parents. I slowly pulled up my mobile banking application. I checked my primary checking account, the one I used to pay my mortgage and daily living expenses. The screen loaded. Available balance 0. Status frozen by court order. A chill ran down my spine. Their lawyer filed an ex parte motion, claiming I was a massive flight risk about to liquidate assets and flee the state. A judge, seeing a sworn affidavit from my parents, claiming their daughter was a malicious thief, granted a temporary freeze on the primary accounts linked to my name, pending an emergency hearing. My first mortgage payment was due in 10 days. My utility bills were set to auto-draft by the end of the week. They were actively trying to financially suffocate me so I would not have the resources to fight back. They expected me to call crying, begging for access to my money, completely ready to sign whatever they wanted, just to survive. Instead of breaking down, I opened my laptop and drafted an urgent email to Nathaniel, one of the most vicious corporate litigators in Georgia, who also happened to be a close friend. Message reads: My parents just filed a fraudulent claim to steal my home and successfully froze my operating accounts. I need an emergency hearing to lift the freeze immediately and a forensic countersuit prepared by Monday morning. They want a brutal war over finances. Let us give them exactly what they asked for. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. I felt no tears threatening to fall today. There was no heartbreak left inside me. The people who had just tried to violently ruin my life were not my real family. They were just greedy parasites looking for a host. And as a senior financial auditor with a decade of brutal corporate experience, I was an absolute expert at tracking down and permanently exterminating these parasites. Early Monday morning, I walked into the glass and steel lobby of Nathaniel's downtown Atlanta law firm. My heels clicked sharply against the polished concrete floor, matching the rapid and calculated rhythm of my thoughts. Nathaniel was waiting for me in his corner office overlooking the city skyline. He was pacing behind his massive oak desk, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a thick stack of printed court filings in the other. Nathaniel was a legal predator in a tailored suit, a man who thrived on destroying arrogant opponents in the courtroom. We had been friends since our undergraduate years, and he knew exactly how hard I had worked for every single thing I owned. Have a seat, Lauren, Nathaniel said, tossing the stack of papers onto the desk. He did not bother with pleasantries. I pulled the docket first thing this morning. Your father and his attorney managed to secure an emergency ex parte hearing late Friday afternoon. They bypassed standard notification protocols by claiming you were actively attempting to wire the real estate equity into an offshore account. It is a textbook bad faith maneuver, designed solely to trigger an automatic asset freeze before you even knew you were being sued. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him, crossing my legs. They want to starve me out. My first mortgage payment on the Buckhead property is due soon. If my operating accounts remain frozen, I default. They think I will surrender the deed to Brittany and Jamal just to get access to my own money for groceries. They are attempting to manufacture leverage, Nathaniel agreed, leaning forward and tapping a specific page in the file. But to get a judge to sign off on a freeze that severe, they had to present compelling preliminary evidence of financial commingling. They submitted 60 pages of bank statements. They swore under penalty of perjury that these statements represent a shared family business trust. And they claim you siphoned $300,000 from this specific trust to pay your earnest money and down payment. I pulled the documents toward me. I am a senior auditor. Tracing the origin of funds is literally what I do for a living. I scanned the first page, my eyes quickly bypassing the legal jargon and locking directly onto the routing and account numbers. My brow furrowed. I flipped to the second page, then the third. The transactions were massive. $50,000 deposited in cash. $80,000 wired to an unknown limited liability company. $25,000 withdrawn in sequential ATM visits. Nathaniel watched my face closely. Do you recognize the account? I stared at the black numbers printed at the top of the page. A cold realization washed over me instantly, followed by a surge of pure disgust. Yes, I recognize it. But it is not a family business trust. This is a basic student checking account. My parents forced me to open it at a local credit union when I was 18 years old, right before I left for my freshman year of college. My father insisted on being a joint account holder so he could monitor my spending and deposit textbook money. I stopped using this account entirely the day I graduated and got my first corporate job. That was over a decade ago. I honestly thought the bank closed it due to inactivity. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, a dark expression crossing his face. Well, they certainly did not close it. Someone has been running millions of dollars through this dormant student account over the last 3 years. And since your name is still technically listed as the primary account holder, your parents used it to establish a direct financial link to you. They presented this to the judge as proof that you have active access to family business capital. They are claiming you transferred the down payment for your house right out of this very account. I shook my head, my mind racing through the forensic implications. That is demonstrably false. Every cent for my house came from my personal investment portfolio. I can trace the origin of those funds directly back to my payroll deposits from my auditing firm. The capital is completely isolated and entirely mine. There is absolutely zero commingling of funds. I know that Nathaniel replied smoothly, but a judge just saw a sworn affidavit from your own parents claiming their daughter is a malicious thief. They paired that lie with a mountain of manipulated banking activity. It is a classic paper trail obfuscation tactic. They created a massive smokescreen to tie up your assets and force a settlement. I felt my professional instincts completely taking over. The personal sting of my parents' betrayal was pushed aside, replaced by cold and calculating logic. Why would my father run his business revenue through a dormant student checking account? I asked, tapping my fingernail against the fraudulent bank statements. That makes zero sense for a legitimate corporate entity. It screams tax evasion. Or worse, it looks exactly like structured money laundering. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. Exactly. Lauren, if they are funneling undeclared cash through an account with your name on it, they are not just trying to steal your new house. They are using you as a financial mule. And if the Internal Revenue Service decides to audit that specific account, you are the one who is going to be held legally responsible for the undeclared income. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal finally crystallized in my mind. Richard and Susan were not simply favoring Brittany and Jamal. They were actively framing me for massive financial crimes to protect themselves. They were willing to throw their eldest daughter into federal prison just to secure a free luxury mansion for their golden child. Draft the emergency motion to lift the asset freeze immediately. I instructed, my voice hard and unwavering. I will provide you with my certified payroll records, my investment account histories, and the exact wire transfer receipts from the house closing. We will prove to the judge that my money is entirely clean and 100% independent. Consider it done, Nathaniel said, typing rapidly on his keyboard. We will get your accounts unfrozen by tomorrow afternoon. But what do we do about their lawsuit for the house? We let them proceed, I replied, a ruthless smile forming on my face. They want to submit fraudulent financial records into a court of law. They want to swear under oath that this money belongs to them. Let them do it. We are going to demand a formal deposition. I want Richard, Susan, and Jamal sitting in a room on the record claiming ownership of those funds. Nathaniel stopped typing and looked at me, a matching smile spreading across his face. You want to trap them in a perjury charge. I want to completely destroy them, I corrected him, standing up and gathering my coat. My father truly thinks he can manipulate numbers to steal my property. But he forgot that he raised a woman who hunts down sophisticated financial criminals for a living. I am going to conduct a full forensic audit on Jamal and my parents starting tonight. By the time we get to that formal deposition, I will know exactly where every single cent of that dirty money came from. And I will use their own reckless greed to burn their entire lives to the ground. 2 weeks later, I sat in a windowless conference room at the Fulton County Courthouse. The air conditioning hummed loudly, doing nothing to cut the suffocating tension in the small space. Court-ordered mediation is a standard procedural hurdle in Georgia civil litigation designed to force warring parties to settle before clogging up a judge's docket. For my family, it was simply another stage for their theatrical manipulation. Across the long mahogany table sat my father, my mother Brittany, and Jamal. Their attorney, a sleazy-looking man named Gregory Evans, sat at the head of their side. Nathaniel sat beside me, immaculately dressed, and entirely unbothered by the hostile glares coming from across the room. At the head of the table sat the court-appointed mediator, a tired-looking retired judge who had clearly seen enough family drama to last a lifetime. The mediator folded his hands and looked between us. "We are here to find an equitable resolution to the dispute over the Buckhead property. Mr. Evans, your clients filed the initial claim. What is their proposed settlement?" Gregory Evans adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "My clients are prepared to offer a very generous compromise. We demand the immediate transfer of the property deed to Brittany and Jamal. In exchange, my clients will not pursue criminal charges against Lauren for the fraudulent transfer of $300,000 from the joint family business account. Furthermore, out of the goodness of their hearts, they will allow Lauren to reside in the finished basement of the Buckhead property for a period of 12 months. I did not laugh. I did not even blink. I simply turned my gaze to my father. Richard leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He looked at me with the same condescending authority he had used to discipline me when I was a teenager. "It is a more than fair offer, Lauren. You made a severe lapse in judgment. You stole from the family to fund a lifestyle you cannot maintain. We are giving you a chance to make it right without going to federal prison. You take the basement, you pay Jamal a modest monthly rent of $2,000, and we sweep this entire embarrassing mess under the rug." "A modest rent to live in the basement of my own home," I said, keeping my voice perfectly deadpan. Jamal smirked, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms over his expensive suit. "It is prime real estate. 2,000 is a steal for that neighborhood. Plus, we will need the extra income to furnish the upstairs nursery and upgrade the kitchen appliances. Your taste in ovens is a little basic for our brand." Nathaniel chuckled softly next to me. He did not look at Jamal. He looked directly at the mediator. "Your Honor, this is not a settlement offer. This is a ransom note drafted by people who do not understand basic property law. My client possesses certified bank records, proving every single cent of the down payment originated from her personal employment income. The account the plaintiffs reference is a dormant student checking account that my client has not accessed in over a decade." Susan slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. The sharp sound echoed loudly in the small room. "Stop lying," Susan snapped, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You have always been a selfish, ungrateful child. We gave you everything. We paid for your braces. We put food on your table. And the moment you get a high-paying corporate job, you turn your back on your own flesh and blood. Brittany is your sister. She is carrying your niece." Susan paused to take a dramatic breath, her eyes welling with highly practiced tears. She reached out and grabbed Brittany by the shoulder, pulling her forward so everyone could see her pregnant belly. "Look at her!" Susan demanded, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Look at what your greed is doing to her." Brittany's blood pressure was dangerously high at her last appointment. The doctor said the stress is actively threatening the baby. "You are endangering an unborn child because you refuse to share your wealth." Jamal's crypto business is facing a temporary liquidity freeze right now. They need a stable, luxurious environment to host investors and secure their future. You have no husband. You have no children. You have absolutely zero need for a house that size. Brittany brought a tissue to her eyes, letting out a soft, theatrical sob. "I cannot even sleep at night, Lauren. I wake up having panic attacks because I do not know where we are going to bring the baby home. Why are you doing this to me? I have always looked up to you. I just wanted our family to be close. We could be a family again if you just stopped being so greedy." I watched my sister cry. 10 years ago, those tears would have broken me. 10 years ago, I would have signed away my life savings just to make my mother stop yelling and to make my sister stop crying. I had been conditioned my entire life to absorb their stress and sacrifice my own stability to keep the peace. But as a senior financial auditor, I had learned how to permanently separate emotional manipulation from hard data. Let me ensure I fully understand this generous proposal, I said, my voice cutting through the fake sobbing like a razor blade. You want me to sign over a $1.5 million asset. You want me to accept legal liability for $300,000 of undocumented cash that magically appeared in a dormant student account. You want me to move into my own basement, and you want me to pay Jamal $2,000 a month in rent, which he will allegedly use to buy a new oven. Yes, Richard said firmly, slamming his fist on the table to emphasize his point. It is the only way to save this family. Nathaniel pulled a crisp, white document from his leather briefcase and slid it across the table toward me. It was the formal legal response to their settlement offer, outlining our absolute refusal to concede a single inch of ground. I reached out and picked up the document. I held it up so my parents, my sister, and Jamal could see the crisp legal text printed on the page. Then, without breaking eye contact with my father, I grabbed the top of the page and tore the document cleanly in half. The sound of the heavy paper ripping was the only noise in the room. I stacked the two halves together and tore them again. I tossed the shredded pieces onto the center of the mahogany table. Here is my counter offer, I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any emotion. I am going to keep my house. I am going to keep my money. And I am going to demand a full sworn deposition from every single one of you. I want you to sit in front of a court reporter under oath and explain exactly how $300,000 of untaxed cash ended up in a student checking account. Gregory Evans went completely rigid. He leaned over and whispered something frantic into my father's ear, his face draining of color. My mother stood up, knocking her chair backward. You little brat, she screamed. We are trying to protect you. If we go to a deposition, the judge will see you as a thief. You will lose your fancy job. You will lose everything. If I lose, I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. But we are not settling. We are going on the record. Jamal jumped up from his chair, pointing aggressively at Nathaniel. You tell your client to take the deal. My investors are getting impatient. We are moving into that house by the end of the month, or I am going to make sure your career is destroyed. I did not wait for Nathaniel to respond. I simply turned and walked toward the heavy wooden door of the mediation room. I opened it and looked back at the 4 people who shared my DNA. See you at the deposition, I said softly. Be sure to bring your bank statements. I'm going to enjoy tearing them apart. I walked out of the room, letting the heavy door slam shut behind me. The mediation was a trap, but they were the ones who had just walked right into it. They thought they could bully me with guilt and fake tears. They did not realize that I had already spent the last 2 weeks tracing every single transaction Jamal had ever made. And what I found was going to send him to federal prison. The heavy oak door of the mediation room clicked shut, cutting off my mother's screaming. The sudden silence of the courthouse hallway was deafening. I adjusted the strap of my leather tote bag on my shoulder and began walking down the long corridor toward the elevators. My heels struck the marble floor in a steady, uncompromising rhythm. Nathaniel walked right beside me, his briefcase swinging slightly, a look of profound professional satisfaction etched across his sharp features. That was certainly one way to conclude a mediation session, Nathaniel said, pressing the down button for the elevator. Tearing up a formal settlement offer in front of a court-appointed mediator is a bold move. I think you actually terrified their attorney. Gregory Evans looked like he was about to have a medical emergency. He should be terrified, I replied smoothly, watching the digital floor indicator slowly tick downward. He filed a fraudulent injunction based on a dormant student checking account. When the judge realizes Evans failed to verify the origin of those funds, his career will be over. And I am going to personally file the grievance with the State Bar Association. Before Nathaniel could respond, the heavy door of the mediation room burst open down the hall. The hinges groaned in protest. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes locked onto the metallic surface of the elevator doors. Lauren, halt right there, my father bellowed. His voice boomed down the empty marble corridor, carrying the exact same commanding resonance he used to discipline me when I was a terrified child. It was the voice of a patriarch who demanded absolute unquestioning obedience. But I was no longer a child, and he had absolutely no authority left over me. I slowly turned around to face him. Richard was storming down the hallway, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. Jamal was marching right beside him, his expensive suit jacket flapping open, his hands balled into tight fists. Susan and Brittany remained lingering in the doorway of the mediation room, watching the confrontation unfold with wide, calculated eyes. "You do not get to walk away from me," Richard sneered, stopping just a few feet away from where Nathaniel and I stood. "You do not get to tear up legal documents and act like you are above this family. We gave you an incredibly generous way out of this mess. We offered you a roof over your head. You offered me a rental agreement for my own basement," I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "You tried to extort a monthly payment from me to fund your son-in-law's kitchen renovations. That is not a generous offer, Richard. That is a massive insult to my intelligence." My father took a deep breath, visibly attempting to rein in his explosive temper. He ran a hand over his thinning hair and shifted his tactics. The aggressive tyrant vanished instantly, replaced by the weary, disappointed patriarch, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was a classic manipulative pivot. "Lauren, you have to look at the bigger picture here," Richard said, his tone dropping to a low, pleading register. "You have to sign that house over to Jamal today. You have to save the family." "Save the family from what exactly?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "From total financial collapse," my father admitted, his eyes darting nervously toward Nathaniel before returning to me. "Jamal has built a brilliant cryptocurrency enterprise. It is a highly complex market, and he is on the verge of securing a massive institutional investment. But he is facing a temporary liquidity crisis. He needs a high-value asset to leverage for his bridging capital. Your house in Buckhead is completely paid off in equity. It is the perfect collateral. If you do not sign it over, Jamal loses his business. Brittany loses her future. The entire family legacy is completely ruined." I stared at the man who raised me. He was standing in a public courthouse, openly admitting that he wanted to strip me of my life savings simply to provide a reckless financial bailout for his golden child's husband. He truly believed it was my fundamental duty to be the sacrificial lamb for their greedy ambitions. "There is no family legacy," I said, my words slicing through the tense air. "There is only a group of desperate adults trying to steal from the one person who actually worked for a living." Jamal stepped forward, jabbing a finger aggressively in my direction. "You do not understand how high-level finance works, you glorified accountant. My business model is revolutionary. I just need capital right now. You are hoarding an asset you do not even need. We are a family. We are supposed to share wealth." "I am a senior financial auditor," I replied, my eyes locking onto Jamal's panicking gaze. "I understand high-level finance better than you understand basic addition. Legitimate investment firms do not require their consultants to steal residential real estate from their sisters-in-law. You do not have a liquidity crisis, Jamal. You have a massive hole in your balance sheet, and you are desperately trying to fill it before someone looks too closely at your ledgers." Jamal flinched. It was a minuscule movement, a tiny tightening of his jaw, but I caught it. The observation confirmed every single suspicion I had been cultivating since the moment they handed me that lawsuit. "Lauren, I am begging you," my father pleaded, taking another step forward. "Do not destroy your sister's life out of spite. Sign the mediation papers. Give us the deed to the house. If you do this one thing for us, I swear we will leave you alone forever. You can go back to your lonely corporate life, and we will never ask you for another favor. Just save the family this one last time." I looked at my father. I saw the absolute desperation in his eyes. I saw the way he gripped the edge of his suit jacket. And I felt a profound, unwavering sense of peace wash over my entire body. The obedient, eager-to-please daughter I used to be officially died in that hallway. "No," I said clearly, the single syllable ringing out with absolute finality. Richard blinked, completely stunned. "What did you just say?" I said no. I am not signing over my house. I am not taking your fraudulent deal. I am not saving this toxic family. You chose to back a man who wears fake luxury watches and spouts meaningless financial jargon. You chose to funnel undocumented cash through a dormant checking account to frame me for your own reckless mistakes. You made those choices, Richard. And now you get to survive the consequences. The elevator arrived with a soft, cheerful chime. The polished steel doors slid open behind me. "This is an official declaration of war," my father snarled, his face twisting back into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are bringing this destruction upon yourself, Lauren. We will take everything from you." Jamal sneered, stepping aggressively close to the elevator doors. "You better watch your back, Lauren. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. My investors do not play nice when their money is tied up." Nathaniel smoothly stepped between Jamal and me, his posture relaxed, but highly alert. "Mr. Vance, I highly recommend you step back. Threatening a defendant in a county courthouse is a fast track to a federal holding cell. Furthermore, any future communication with my client will be done exclusively through formal subpoenas. Have a terrible afternoon." I stepped into the elevator. Nathaniel followed, turning around to face the hallway. I looked directly at my father and Jamal as the heavy steel doors began to slide shut. I did not blink. I did not look away. The last thing they saw was my cold, triumphant smile right before the doors sealed them out of my life completely. As the elevator began its descent to the parking garage, Nathaniel let out a long breath. "They are terrified," he noted, adjusting his briefcase. That was not a negotiation. That was a desperate plea for a financial lifeline. Jamal is hiding something catastrophic. "I know," I replied, pulling my car keys from my tote bag. "And they are going to play extremely dirty to get what they want. They will not stop with a civil lawsuit. They are going to try to destroy my reputation next." "Let them try," Nathaniel said, a sharp grin returning to his face. "We have the high ground." I walked out of the elevator into the dim parking garage, my mind already 10 steps ahead. The legal battle was just the beginning. I knew my mother and sister too well. They would not accept this defeat quietly. If they could not steal my house through the court system, they would try to force my surrender by destroying me in the court of public opinion. I knew a brutal smear campaign was coming, and I was entirely prepared to let them dig their own public graves. The attack began exactly 48 hours later. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the forensic financial models of Jamal's cryptocurrency shell companies when my cell phone vibrated, then it vibrated again. Within 60 seconds, a relentless cascade of notifications flooded my screen. Alerts from Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and LinkedIn flashed in rapid succession. I picked up the device, my eyes narrowing as I opened a message from one of my junior auditors. It contained a single link and a text that read, "You need to see this right now." I clicked the link. The screen transitioned to a TikTok video. There was Brittany sitting on the edge of a bed in a dimly lit room wearing an oversized maternity sweater. Her makeup was expertly applied to make her look exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red to suggest she had been weeping for hours. She looked directly into the camera, cradling her baby bump, and took a shuddering, highly theatrical breath. "Hi, everyone," Brittany whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured vulnerability. "I did not want to make this video. I really did not. But my family is being destroyed, and I do not know where else to turn for help." I watched my expression hardening as my 30-year-old sister launched into a masterclass of digital manipulation. She spent the next 3 minutes spinning a fictional narrative that completely inverted reality. According to Brittany, our parents had spent decades saving a small nest egg for her growing family. She claimed they had placed the funds into a joint account for safekeeping. Then she delivered the devastating lie. She looked into the lens and accused me, her older corporate employed sister, of exploiting a legal loophole to drain the account and purchase a luxury mansion in Buckhead, leaving her pregnant and practically homeless. But the financial lies were not the most dangerous part of her performance. The true malice emerged when she brought Jamal into the frame. Jamal walked into the shot, looking uncharacteristically defeated, placing a supportive hand on Brittany's shoulder. "My husband is a brilliant financial consultant," Brittany sobbed, wiping away a fake tear. "He has worked twice as hard to build his business, Because as a black man in the corporate finance world, the system is already rigged against him. And now my sister, a privileged senior auditor for a massive corporation, is using her wealthy corporate lawyers to crush us. She froze our bank accounts. She called the police to physically intimidate us when we tried to retrieve our family heirlooms from the house she stole. She is weaponizing her corporate privilege to bankrupt a black entrepreneur and throw a pregnant woman onto the streets. I paused the video. The view count was already climbing past 500,000. Brittany knew exactly what she was doing. She was a seasoned social media influencer who understood the modern digital landscape. She knew that utilizing explosive buzzwords like systemic oppression, corporate privilege, and financial abuse would instantly trigger an algorithmic firestorm. She intentionally weaponized Jamal's race and her own pregnancy to transform a baseless real estate dispute into a viral social justice crusade. I scrolled down to the comment section. It was an absolute bloodbath. Thousands of strangers were tearing me apart. They called me a corporate vulture, a thief, and a racist. They demanded that I return the house. Some users were already organizing a campaign to identify my employer and demand my immediate termination. My sister had successfully weaponized the internet, aiming a digital firing squad directly at my career and my reputation. My phone rang loudly, breaking the silence of the kitchen. It was my mother. I let it ring, watching her name flash on the screen. She was calling to revel in the chaos to see if the viral pressure had finally broken my resolve. When the call went to voicemail, she sent a text message immediately. Text reads, "The internet knows the truth now, Lauren. The whole world sees what a selfish monster you are. Transfer the deed to Jamal by noon tomorrow, and Brittany will post a follow-up video saying it was all a misunderstanding. If you do not comply, we will let the internet ruin your life." It was a digital ransom demand. They honestly believed that public shaming would force my surrender. They assumed I would panic at the sight of thousands of angry comments and instantly fold under the pressure. Instead of panicking, I took a screenshot of my mother's text message and immediately forwarded it to Nathaniel. It was a documented extortion attempt, another beautiful piece of evidence to add to our growing arsenal. I did not post a rebuttal video. I did not lock my social media profiles to hide from the mob. I simply closed the TikTok application, opened my secure auditing software, and returned to my forensic investigation. While Brittany was busy performing for strangers on the internet, I was busy tracking the digital footprint of Jamal's cryptocurrency business. Social media outrage is entirely fleeting, but financial fraud is permanent. Let the internet scream. Let my sister garner her millions of sympathy views. Let my parents celebrate their temporary public relations victory. They were playing a loud, messy game of checkers for an audience of strangers. I was playing a silent, lethal game of chess for an audience of one federal judge. And the deeper I dug into Jamal's financial history, the more I realized that my sister had just directed a massive spotlight onto a man who desperately needed to stay hidden in the shadows. The viral video was no victory for them. It was a massive, catastrophic miscalculation. By making this a public spectacle, Brittany had unwittingly guaranteed that when the truth finally surfaced, the fallout would be spectacular, highly publicized, and completely inescapable. I smiled, letting the cold blue glow of my new laptop screen illuminate the dark, quiet kitchen, and I silently continued to carefully follow the money. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I always demanded of myself. The viral video had dominated the weekend news cycle. My inbox was flooded with hate mail, and protesters had supposedly started organizing online. I walked into the lobby of my auditing firm. The usual polite nods from receptionists were replaced by averted eyes and nervous whispers. I swiped my badge and rode the elevator to the executive floor. Before I could even reach my desk, the head of human resources, a stern woman named Patricia, intercepted me. "Lauren, Greg needs to see you in the primary conference room. Now." I nodded, handing my coat to my assistant, and walked straight into the glass-walled room. Greg was sitting at the head of the table. Two senior partners and the firm's chief legal counsel sat alongside him. A massive flat-screen monitor on the wall was paused on Brittany's tear-stained face. The corporate fallout had officially commenced. "Take a seat," Lauren Gregg said. His voice was completely devoid of its usual warmth. This was business, survival mode. "I assume we are discussing the digital smear campaign my family launched over the weekend," I said, taking the chair opposite him. I kept my posture relaxed, my hands folded neatly on the polished wood. Smear campaign is a mild term for a public relations catastrophe, the legal counsel snapped. Your sister tagged our corporate social media accounts in her follow-up posts. We have received over 10,000 angry emails demanding your immediate termination. Activist groups are review bombing our corporate profiles. Clients are calling asking why a senior auditor at our prestigious firm is allegedly using corporate lawyers to financially ruin a pregnant woman and a minority entrepreneur. You are bleeding our reputation dry. I am being extorted, I replied flatly. And the allegations are entirely fabricated. The internet does not care about facts, Lauren Gregg said, pinching the bridge of his nose. They care about optics. And right now, the optics are disastrous. We audit major companies. Our entire business model relies on absolute integrity and unassailable ethics. Having a senior auditor trend online as a corporate villain is a massive liability. We are considering placing you on indefinite administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Placing me on leave is a tactical error, I said, locking eyes with Greg. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. That folder contains the certified banking records for my residential purchase, completely isolating my capital from my parents. More importantly, it contains a printed screenshot of a text message sent by my mother on Saturday night. Greg opened the folder. The room fell silent as he read the extortion demand. "This is blackmail," Greg murmured, his brow furrowing. "Yes, it is," I said. "My family filed a fraudulent civil lawsuit to steal my real estate equity. When I refused to surrender, they attempted to weaponize public outrage to force a settlement. If you suspend me, you validate their lies. You show the public that this firm caves to baseless social media tantrums. That makes you look weak. And this firm is not weak." The legal counsel frowned. "Lauren, even if this is extortion, the noise is deafening. We cannot operate with a mob at our gates." "The mob will disappear the second the truth is exposed," I countered, leaning forward. "My brother-in-law Jamal is not a struggling entrepreneur being crushed by systemic oppression. He is running a highly sophisticated cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme. I spent the entire weekend conducting a preliminary forensic analysis of his public wallet addresses and shell companies. He is moving millions of dollars in unregistered securities. He is currently facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis, which is precisely why he is so desperately trying to steal a luxury asset from me." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. The senior partners sat up straighter. Greg closed the folder and looked at me with renewed intensity. "You can prove this." "I am a senior auditor trained by you, Greg," I said smoothly. "I do not make allegations I cannot prove with hard mathematical data. Jamal is trying to fill a massive deficit before his investors realize their money is gone. My parents mortgaged their entire future to bail him out, and now they are drowning. They are using this viral video as a smokescreen to hide a massive federal crime. If Jamal is running a Ponzi scheme, the federal authorities will inevitably get involved." The legal counsel noted, tapping a pen against the table. "If we fire you and it comes out that we terminated a whistleblowing auditor to appease a digital mob orchestrated by a financial criminal, the subsequent public relations disaster would be 10 times worse." "Exactly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You do not want to be on the wrong side of this narrative when the federal indictments drop. And they will drop." Greg stared at me for a long, calculating minute. The tension in the room was palpable. He was weighing the immediate pain of the social media backlash against the catastrophic risk of backing the wrong horse. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Here is the deal," Lauren Gregg said, his voice hard as steel. "I will not suspend you. I will not validate an extortion attempt, but I cannot shield you from this indefinitely. You have exactly 1 week. 1 week to resolve this civil lawsuit, unmask this fraud, and clear your name. If this media circus is still dragging our firm through the mud by next Monday, I will have no choice but to sever your employment." "1 week is more than enough," I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I am going to completely dismantle them. Do not let this distract you from your active client files, Patricia warned from the corner. My work will remain flawless, I assured her. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my head held high. I had secured my professional standing, but the clock was ticking. As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed with an incoming email from my bank. The temporary restraining order on my accounts was officially in effect. My mortgage was due in a matter of days and my access to cash was entirely choked off. The financial war had officially escalated to dangerous heights, but my focus remained razor sharp. I just needed to dig deeper. I opened the secure banking application on my secondary monitor. The red banner across the top of the interface was blindingly stark. Account restricted. I clicked through to my primary checking portfolio, the central hub where my salary was deposited, and my major bills were routed. The balance displayed was a flat, uncompromising zero. They had not just frozen the suspected $300,000. Gregory Evans had successfully argued that my entire financial network was contaminated by commingled family funds. The judge had placed a blanket freeze on every liquid asset directly tied to my Social Security number. The legal parameters of the temporary restraining order were intentionally draconian. It prohibited me from selling, transferring, or encumbering any assets. It was a financial stranglehold designed to create maximum panic. I pulled up my financial spreadsheet. The numbers were brutal and undeniable. My first mortgage payment for the Buckhead estate was exactly $12,400 due in exactly 8 days. Property taxes, smart home security, monitoring utilities, and my initial legal retainer for Nathaniel required an additional $9,000. I had $21,000 in immediate liabilities bearing down on me, and my access to cash had been entirely severed. My phone buzzed, breaking my concentration. A direct text from my father. I stared at the screen, analyzing his predictable tactics. Text reads, "The courts agree with us, Lauren. Your accounts are locked. You cannot pay for that mansion, and you cannot afford a prolonged legal battle. Stop this foolishness. Sign the deed over to Jamal today, and I will have my lawyer lift the restraining order on your accounts by tomorrow morning. Do not lose everything out of stubborn pride." It was a classic siege tactic. Cut off the supply lines, wait for the target to starve, and then offer a poisoned peace treaty. Richard expected me to look at my frozen bank accounts, panic about defaulting on my dream home, and immediately surrender. He thought financial terror would break my spirit. He forgot that I spent my entire career navigating financial terror. I did not reply to his message. I simply archived it, maintaining my strict policy of no direct contact. I needed a change of scenery to clear my head. I left the executive floor and walked down to the upscale lobby cafe. The line was short. I ordered a black espresso, handed my corporate debit card to the barista, and waited. The machine beeped a harsh negative tone. "Declined," the barista said, looking apologetic. "Do you have another card?" I felt a sharp spike of adrenaline. The freeze had propagated faster than anticipated. It had already hit my secondary banking institutions. I pulled out a low-limit obscure travel credit card I rarely used and handed it over. The transaction approved. I took my espresso and walked to a quiet table in the corner, the physical reality of my situation settling heavily onto my shoulders. I was a wealthy, successful senior auditor, yet I was suddenly standing on the absolute brink of financial ruin. The sensation of a declined card was a visceral, humiliating reminder of the power my family had temporarily seized. They had successfully weaponized the legal system to construct a financial prison around me. I dialed Nathaniel on my secure line. He answered immediately. "They locked it all down," I said, keeping my voice low and steady over the ambient noise of the cafe. "Checking savings and my secondary investment portfolios. Everything linked to my primary identification is frozen solid." "Evans is playing a scorched earth game," Nathaniel replied, the frustration evident in his tone. "I just got off the phone with the clerk's office." I filed the emergency motion to lift the freeze, highlighting the lack of verified evidence in their initial claim. But the judge who signed the ex parte order went on a planned vacation this morning. The substitute judge will not review emergency motions until next Thursday. I did the mental math instantly. Next Thursday is 3 days after my mortgage grace period expires. If I miss that payment, the bank registers a default. My credit score tanks, the mortgage terms can be reevaluated or penalized, and they gain a massive psychological victory. That is why Evans timed the filing for a Friday afternoon, Nathaniel explained. It is a malicious scheduling maneuver. They calculated your mortgage due date and engineered this freeze to guarantee a default. Lauren, I can float you a personal loan to cover the mortgage payment. We can draft a clean promissory note right now. I smiled, genuinely touched by his offer. In a world where my own blood relatives were actively trying to destroy me, my college friend was ready to hand me $12,000, no questions asked. Keep your money, Nathaniel, I said softly. I am not letting them force me into borrowing cash just to survive their extortion attempt. It violates my principles. Then, how are you going to pay the mortgage, he asked. If you default, they will use that in court to argue that you cannot sustain the property, bolstering their claim that the house should be transferred to Brittany and Jamal to prevent foreclosure. Let me worry about the liquidity, I assured him. You just focus on the deposition preparations. We have them scheduled for questioning under oath on Wednesday. I want the trap perfectly set. I hung up the phone and took a slow sip of my black espresso. The bitterness grounded me. My father wanted to play a game of financial attrition, but I had spent my life anticipating disasters. I had a contingency plan for everything. I walked back to the elevators, rode up to my office, and locked the door. I bypassed my frozen banking applications and logged into a heavily encrypted decentralized digital wallet. Years ago, while auditing a tech firm, I had learned the value of holding alternative unseizable assets. I had quietly accumulated a modest reserve of cryptocurrency completely detached from my primary banking identity. It was my absolute last resort, an emergency parachute designed for catastrophic system failures. I initiated a peer-to-peer exchange, converting just enough digital assets into clean fiat currency. I routed the funds through a secure payment processor directly to my mortgage lender. It took exactly 14 minutes to bypass my father's elaborate financial blockade. The mortgage was paid. The house remained mine. The lights would stay on. I closed the payment confirmation window and let out a long, steady breath. The siege had failed. My father had thrown his most devastating weapon at me, assuming I would instantly crumble. Instead, the pressure had only forged my resolve into something unbreakable. With my immediate survival secured, my focus violently shifted from defense to pure, unadulterated offense. I opened a new desktop folder and imported the public ledger data scraped from Jamal's businesses over the weekend. They wanted to steal my home to cover his debts. It was time to discover exactly who Jamal owed money to and how I could use that information to execute a flawless checkmate against the people who sought to destroy me. I began by pulling the corporate registration filings for Jamal's primary entity, Apex Digital Holdings. The office was dead silent, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of my dual monitors. As a senior financial auditor, I spent my days hunting down sophisticated corporate embezzlement. I knew exactly where people hid their dirty money, and more importantly, I knew how they tried to cover their tracks. Jamal thought he was a financial genius because he knew how to use buzzwords like blockchain, decentralized finance, and algorithmic trading. He assumed that because cryptocurrency operated outside traditional banking structures, his transactions were completely invisible. He was fundamentally wrong. The blockchain is a public ledger. Every single transaction is permanently recorded. The only challenge is tying an anonymous digital wallet to a real-world identity. And Jamal, in his relentless arrogance, had made that incredibly easy. I opened a side window and pulled up his public Instagram and LinkedIn profiles. Jamal constantly bragged about his wealth online. He posted screenshots of his trading successes, flashing QR codes and partial wallet addresses to prove to his followers how much capital he controlled. It was a massive rookie mistake. I fed those public wallet addresses into a specialized forensic analytics software I frequently utilized for corporate fraud investigations. The program immediately began mapping the flow of digital assets, creating a complex web of transactions across my screen. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the inbound and outbound traffic. Jamal was actively soliciting investments from upper-middle-class families in the Atlanta area. He promised them a guaranteed monthly return of 12%. That metric alone was a massive red flag. In a volatile crypto market, guaranteeing a fixed double-digit monthly return is mathematically impossible for a legitimate trading firm. The data visualization completed its rendering, and the truth stared back at me in undeniable, highly incriminating detail. Jamal was not trading cryptocurrency. He was not investing a single dime of the capital he raised. The blockchain clearly showed that whenever a new investor wired funds into his primary wallet, Jamal immediately diverted that money to pay the monthly returns of his older investors. He was operating a textbook Ponzi scheme. I traced the flow of capital over the last 24 months. The scheme had functioned smoothly as long as new money kept pouring in. But 3 months ago, the inbound deposits had drastically slowed down. The crypto market had experienced a sharp downturn, and new investors had grown hesitant. Jamal's incoming revenue stream had completely dried up, but his obligations to pay the older investors remained. His digital wallets were currently bleeding out. He was facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I shifted my focus away from the blockchain and into traditional public records. I accessed the Fulton County database and ran a search on Apex Digital Holdings. The results made a cold, predatory smile touch my lips. The Internal Revenue Service had filed a massive federal tax lien against Jamal's company just 6 weeks ago. He owed over $2 million in undeclared corporate taxes. The federal government was preparing to seize his assets. He was backed into a corner, completely desperate for a massive infusion of clean cash to hold off the federal investigators and quiet his panicked investors. But how did my parents fit into this disaster? Why were Richard and Susan suddenly willing to destroy their eldest daughter, commit perjury, and forcibly seize my real estate to bail out their son-in-law? I opened a new search window and ran a comprehensive background query on my father's manufacturing supply company. I pulled the current property deeds and financial filings associated with my parents' names. The truth I uncovered was absolutely staggering. 3 months ago precisely, when Jamal's inbound investments began to dry up, Richard and Susan had taken out a massive home equity line of credit on the house I grew up in. They had extracted every single ounce of equity from their primary residence. But they did not stop there. They had also leveraged a high-interest commercial loan against my father's business inventory and equipment. The total borrowed capital exceeded $2 million. I cross-referenced the public UCC filings and tracked the dates the loan funds were dispersed. I compared those dates to the transaction history on Jamal's primary cryptocurrency wallet. The timeline was a perfect, devastating match. Within 48 hours of my parents securing those loans, massive anonymous deposits had hit Jamal's accounts. I sat back in my leather chair, the entire twisted puzzle finally locking into place. My parents were completely bankrupt. They had gambled their entire retirement, their home, and their business on Jamal's fraudulent scheme. They had fallen for his flashy suits and aggressive promises of generational wealth. Now the Ponzi scheme was collapsing. The banks were going to call in those massive loans, and my parents had absolutely zero means to repay them. If Jamal went down, my parents went down with him. They were actively facing total financial ruin and the impending foreclosure of their home. The sudden urgency of their lawsuit made perfect sense. They did not want my house so Brittany could have a nice nursery. They needed to steal my $1.5 million property because it was completely paid off. It was the only clean, highly valuable asset left in their immediate proximity. Their plan was to force me to sign over the deed, immediately liquidate the property, and use my hard-earned equity to patch the gaping $2 million hole in Jamal's sinking ship. Furthermore, I realized exactly why they had funneled money through that dormant student checking account bearing my name. If the federal authorities raided Jamal and followed the paper trail of the Ponzi scheme, my parents were trying to establish a financial buffer. They were actively setting me up to look like a co-conspirator, ensuring that if someone had to go to federal prison for tax evasion and fraud, it would be me, not their golden child's husband. The audacity was breathtaking, the betrayal was absolute. I selected the most damning transaction logs, the IRS tax liens, and the property loan documents. I compiled them into a secure encrypted PDF file and sent it directly to Nathaniel. My defense was completely solid, but I was no longer interested in merely defending my property. I was going to let them walk into the deposition room, place their hands on a Bible, and swear under oath that their finances were immaculate. And then, I was going to use this mountain of forensic evidence to completely obliterate them. It was nearing 2 in the morning on a Tuesday when the smart security application on my phone illuminated my dark bedroom with a stark red notification. Motion detected front gate. I sat up immediately, my mind instantly shifting from a deep sleep into absolute clarity. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and tapped the notification to bring up the high-definition live camera feed. Standing outside the heavy wrought iron gates of my Buckhead property was Jamal. He was pacing frantically back and forth in the glow of the amber streetlights. The polished, arrogant cryptocurrency consultant I had faced at my housewarming party was entirely gone. His expensive suit jacket was missing, his tie was yanked loose around his collar, and he was repeatedly dragging his hands over his face in a gesture of pure, unfiltered desperation. He stepped up to the security pedestal and pressed the intercom buzzer. The sharp sound echoed loudly through the silent house. I did not move to turn on any lights. I simply walked out of my bedroom and stood in the dark hallway overlooking the grand foyer. The house remained completely pitch black. I tapped the audio recording icon on my phone, ensuring the device was capturing both the live video feed and the crisp audio from the external microphone system. I took a slow, steady breath and pressed the two-way communication button. "What do you want, Jamal?" I asked, my voice echoing out through the external speakers. I kept my tone flat, authoritative, and entirely devoid of emotion. Lauren Jamal shouted, jumping slightly at the sudden sound of my voice in the dark. His eyes darted around nervously as he stared directly into the camera lens. "You need to open this gate right now. We need to talk about this situation. This cannot wait until the deposition. You have to let me inside." "You are trespassing on private property at 2 in the morning," I replied smoothly, watching his panicked movements on my screen. "If you do not step away from that gate in the next 30 seconds, I am dispatching the police. You already know I have absolutely zero hesitation about having you arrested." "No, listen to me," Jamal pleaded, gripping the cold iron bars of the gate. His knuckles were bone white under the streetlights. "You do not understand what is happening right now. The freeze on your accounts was supposed to make you surrender immediately. Your father said you would panic. He said you would sign the deed over to avoid losing the property to the bank. Why did you not default on the mortgage, Lauren? How did you manage to pay it?" I smiled in the total darkness of my home. He was unraveling completely. He needed the equity from this house immediately to pay off his furious investors, and my ability to bypass their financial blockade had completely shattered his delicate timeline. "I paid it because I am a senior auditor who understands how to secure and isolate capital," I answered calmly. "Did you honestly believe a simple restraining order on my primary checking account would leave me helpless? You and my father severely miscalculated my financial literacy." Jamal slammed his fist against the iron gate. The sharp metallic clang rang out into the quiet night. "You are ruining everything," he screamed, his voice cracking with genuine, undeniable panic. "You are sitting in a massive mansion that you do not even need. My investors are calling me every single hour. They are tracking my physical location. They are threatening my pregnant wife. Do you understand what kind of people I borrowed money from? They do not care about civil court dates. They care about immediate liquidity. If I do not show them hard collateral by the end of this week, they are going to take everything I have." I kept the recording application running, capturing every single word of his desperate confession. He was openly admitting that his business was an absolute fraud, that he had borrowed money from dangerous individuals, and that the entire civil lawsuit was a fabricated extortion attempt designed solely to steal my asset and cover his mounting debts. He was literally handing me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his case. "That sounds like a severe personal crisis," I noted, my voice completely unwavering. But none of it explains why you feel entitled to steal my residential real estate. Because your parents promised it to me, Jamal yelled, his desperation fully boiling over into reckless rage. Richard and Susan guaranteed they could force you out. They took out massive commercial loans against their own house to give me bridge capital, and they swore this property would be the ultimate collateral to pay it all back. They said you were a pushover. They said you always sacrificed your own happiness to keep the family intact. They promised me this house. They lied to you, I replied coldly. Just like you lied to your investors. You built a sloppy Ponzi scheme, Jamal. You funneled cash to cover your tracks, and you thought you could use my parents' greed to secure a permanent bailout, but you hit a massive brick wall. I am not a pushover. I am the person who is going to watch you go to federal prison. Jamal stepped back from the gate, his chest heaving as he stared up at the dark silhouette of my house. You think you are so untouchable? He sneered, though the distinct tremor in his voice betrayed his absolute terror. My lawyers are going to tear you apart in the deposition. We are going to swear under oath that you stole that money. The judge will definitely believe your own parents over you. You are going to lose this house, Lauren. We will make sure of it. I saved the high-definition recording file to my encrypted cloud storage, creating a permanent, undeniable record of his midnight extortion attempt and his explicit admission of perjury planning. We will see exactly what the judge believes, I said softly. Now get off my property before I have you arrested. I cut the intercom feed. Outside, Jamal stood frozen for a few long seconds, staring blankly at the camera. Then, finally realizing his intimidation tactics had completely failed, he turned around and hurried back down the street, melting away into the shadows of the suburban night. I walked back to my bedroom and placed the phone securely on my nightstand. The brief surge of adrenaline had already passed, replaced by a profound, calculating calm. Jamal had just confirmed every single piece of forensic evidence I gathered over the weekend. He had openly admitted that the lawsuit was a sham, that my parents were financially ruined, and they planned to commit federal perjury during the upcoming deposition to steal my property. They thought they were walking into a standard civil dispute. They thought they could lie their way to a multi-million-dollar settlement by playing the role of concerned, aggrieved family members. They had absolutely no idea that I had just recorded the architect of their entire fraudulent scheme, confessing to the entire conspiracy. I laid back against my comfortable pillows and stared up at the ceiling. The trap was perfectly set. The bait was successfully taken. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into the deposition room, place their right hands on a Bible, and legally swear to the lies that would permanently seal their fate. The destruction of their carefully crafted facade was going to be an absolute masterpiece of legal strategy. The sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting long golden shadows across my home office. I had not slept a single minute, but I felt entirely energized. The midnight confrontation with Jamal had given me the psychological upper hand, but a courtroom requires hard, indisputable documentation. I needed to package his panicked confession with bulletproof financial data. I sat down at my desk and opened the encrypted folder Nathaniel and I had started building. I needed to thoroughly solidify the exact mechanics of Jamal's Ponzi scheme to properly present it to the judge. I securely logged into the federal court database using my professional auditing credentials. I quickly pulled the formal Internal Revenue Service filings against Apex Digital Holdings. The tax liens were massive and aggressively detailed. Jamal owed exactly $2.4 million in unpaid federal taxes, penalties, and severe corporate fraud fines. But the IRS intervention was only one piece of the puzzle. I needed to permanently map the exact flow of his stolen investor funds. I utilized an advanced blockchain tracking algorithm that my auditing firm heavily deployed for high-level corporate investigations. I carefully inputted the public digital wallet addresses Jamal carelessly posted on his various social media platforms. The software mapped the complicated transactions in real time, creating a glaring red visual web of criminal financial activity directly across my monitor screen. The raw data clearly showed a classic, completely undisguised pyramid structure. Whenever a brand new investor transferred capital into Jamal's primary exchange account, those exact funds were immediately split. A small percentage was routed back to his older investors as fake dividend payments, just to keep them quiet and compliant. The vast majority of the stolen cash was swiftly funneled directly into offshore decentralized digital wallets that Jamal exclusively controlled. He was not genuinely investing in emerging tech markets at all. He was actively stealing from hard-working middle-class families to fund his tailored designer suits, his leased luxury vehicles, and his complete illusion of entrepreneurial success. Jamal targeted vulnerable people. I read through the transaction logs matching public wallet addresses to the people commenting on his social media pages. He manipulated his own community, selling them a false dream of financial liberation, while quietly draining their life savings. His entire business model relied on absolute deception, and now that the crypto market was experiencing a sharp downturn, the influx of new capital had completely dried up. His scheme was violently imploding. Then I finally located the absolute smoking gun that tied my parents directly to his rapidly sinking ship. I systematically cross-referenced the specific dates of the massive commercial loans my parents had recently acquired against their local manufacturing business. The very next business day, those exact dollar amounts miraculously appeared as anonymous deposits in Jamal's primary digital wallet. My parents had recklessly liquidated their entire life savings and fully mortgaged their essential business equipment to keep his fraudulent enterprise afloat. They did not stop there. I pulled the property records for my childhood home. Richard and Susan had recently taken out a massive home equity line of credit, extracting every single ounce of value from the house they had owned for 30 years. They handed all of it directly to Jamal. They were effectively operating as unindicted co-conspirators in a massive federal financial crime. The realization was chilling. They were completely bankrupt. The bank was undoubtedly preparing to foreclose on their primary residence, and the commercial lenders were circling their failing manufacturing business. They had gambled their entire existence on Jamal's flashy promises, and they had lost absolutely everything. Their sudden, desperate need to steal my $1.5 million home was the final pathetic gasp of a drowning family. They planned to force me out, sell my property, and use my hard-earned equity to pay off Jamal's angry investors and the IRS. And then I saw exactly how my old student checking account fit into their criminal enterprise. When Jamal realized the federal authorities were closing in, he needed a way to wash the cash my parents were giving him. Richard and Susan utilized the dormant checking account bearing my name to bounce the funds. They deposited their loan money into the account, labeled it as corporate revenue, and then funneled it to Jamal. They intentionally used my identity as a financial shield. If the federal agents followed the paper trail, my parents were actively setting me up to take the fall for the money laundering operation. They were entirely willing to let me go to federal prison just to protect their golden child's fraudulent husband. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal extinguished any lingering shred of familial loyalty I possessed. I methodically organized the bank transfers, the verified IRS liens, the property foreclosure warnings, and the comprehensive blockchain maps into a sleek, highly professional dossier. I exported all the digital files onto a secure flash drive and printed 3 hard copies, placing them perfectly into thick black binders. This was no longer just a standard civil defense against a fabricated property dispute. I had actively constructed a comprehensive federal criminal indictment. I packed the heavy binders into my leather tote bag and prepared to head out the front door to meet Nathaniel. The formal deposition was merely 48 hours away, and I was holding the exact explosive material required to obliterate them entirely. My cell phone chimed on the desk. A text message from my mother illuminated the screen. It read, "Lauren, your father and I are willing to be reasonable. If you agree to sign over half the equity in the house, we will drop the lawsuit and allow you to stay in the primary bedroom. We just want peace in this family. Please make the right choice before the deposition destroys you." I stared at the screen, a cold, predatory smile forming on my lips. They were terrified. The facade was cracking, and they were attempting a pathetic feint to secure a settlement before going on the record under oath. They had absolutely no idea that I held all the cards, and I was about to let them walk right off a legal cliff. I did not reply to my mother's desperate text message. I simply locked my phone, grabbed my heavy leather tote bag, and walked out to my car. The morning traffic in Atlanta was heavy, but my mind was completely clear. I drove straight to Nathaniel's law firm and bypassed the receptionist. Walking directly into his private office, I dropped the 3 thick black binders onto his polished mahogany desk. Nathaniel looked up from his computer. He saw the cold intensity in my eyes and immediately pulled the first binder toward him. "What did you find, Lauren?" he asked, opening the cover. "Everything," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. "I found exactly why they are trying to steal my house." Nathaniel spent the next 45 minutes reading through the forensic dossier in absolute silence. He reviewed the blockchain transaction maps, the Internal Revenue Service tax liens, and the public property records. As a seasoned corporate litigator, he understood complex financial fraud, but the sheer maliciousness of my parents' actions clearly stunned him. He leaned back in his chair, taking off his glasses and rubbing his temples. "Lauren, this is staggering," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Jamal is running a textbook Ponzi scheme. That much is obvious from the digital ledger. But your parents' involvement is what makes this truly horrific." I nodded, leaning forward. "Look at the loan origination dates on the third tab." Nathaniel flipped to the designated section. He scanned the commercial lending agreements and the home equity line of credit documents. His eyes widened as he processed the terms of the loans. "They bypass traditional banking institutions," Nathaniel noted, tracing the text with his pen. "Richard and Susan went to a hard money lender. They took out $2.2 million at a predatory 28% interest rate. They leveraged the manufacturing business your grandfather built from scratch, and they completely mortgaged your childhood home. They liquidated 30 years of honest family legacy for a quick cash injection, and they handed every single cent directly to Jamal," I added, pointing to the corresponding blockchain deposit dates. "He promised them a massive guaranteed return on their investment. My mother always wanted elite country club wealth, and Jamal sold her a shortcut. When his scheme started collapsing, they doubled down instead of walking away." Nathaniel pulled up the Fulton County property database on his monitor to cross-reference my findings. He typed rapidly, his eyes darting across the screen. The reality of their situation was far worse than a simple financial mistake. "Lauren," Nathaniel said, turning the monitor so I could see the screen. "The hard money lender filed a formal notice of default yesterday morning. Your parents missed 3 consecutive interest payments. The bank is foreclosing on the manufacturing plant and their primary residence simultaneously. The properties go to public auction in exactly 18 days." The timeline illuminated everything. The rushed civil lawsuit, the aggressive ambush at my housewarming party, the frantic midnight visit from Jamal and my mother's desperate text messages. They were officially 18 days away from being entirely homeless. They needed to force me out of my paid-off Buckhead mansion so they could immediately liquidate the asset and pay off the predatory lenders. "They are sacrificing you to save themselves," Nathaniel stated plainly. "They made a catastrophic financial gamble on a flashy con artist, and now they expect you to absorb the absolute ruin of their decisions." "It is much worse than that," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Look at the routing numbers on the transaction logs." Nathaniel flipped to the final section of the binder. He studied the paper trail connecting my parents' commercial loans to Jamal's digital wallets. He noticed the intermediary account instantly. It was the dormant student checking account bearing my name and my social security number. His face went completely pale. "They washed the money through your identity," he said, a quiet horror creeping into his voice. "Yes," I confirmed. "When the federal investigators inevitably raid Jamal's operation, they will follow the blockchain back to the fiat currency deposits. The paper trail leads directly to an account with my name on it. My parents intentionally created a financial buffer. They are actively framing me for federal money laundering. If someone has to go to prison for this fraud, they engineered it so the authorities will arrest me instead of their golden child's husband. The ultimate parental sacrifice." They were not just trying to steal my real estate equity. They were actively willing to sacrifice my freedom, my unblemished corporate career, and my entire future just to protect Brittany from facing the consequences of marrying a criminal. I sat in the leather chair, letting the absolute finality of their betrayal wash over me. There was no going back from this. Nathaniel closed the binder. The legal implications were massive. We need to go to the federal authorities immediately, Lauren. We have to preemptively disclose this money laundering operation before the IRS knocks on your door. We will go to the authorities, I agreed. But not today. If we report them right now, the civil lawsuit gets paused pending a criminal investigation. They will claim ignorance. They will hire expensive defense attorneys and drag this out for years, claiming Jamal tricked them into using my account. I want them completely trapped with zero avenue for escape. How do we do that? Nathaniel asked, leaning forward. We let the civil deposition proceed as scheduled on Wednesday, I explained, outlining my strategy. We get them in a room with a certified court reporter. We force them to testify under penalty of perjury that the funds in that specific checking account belong entirely to them. We make them swear on the legal record that they controlled the money and authorized the transfers. Nathaniel smiled, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. We let them claim ownership of the criminal assets. Once they perjure themselves to claim the money, they automatically confess to the federal money laundering charges. Exactly, I said. But they are currently panicked. Jamal's midnight visit proves they are losing their nerve. Panicked people make unpredictable decisions. We need them, walking into that deposition feeling incredibly overconfident. We need them to believe their extortion tactics are working, so they will boldly claim ownership of the fraudulent funds without hesitation. Nathaniel tapped his pen against the desk. We need to execute a strategic feint. We need to make them think you are breaking under the pressure of the asset freeze. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my laptop. I am going to send my parents an email right now. I will pretend that the financial strain is destroying me. I will offer a fake compromise. It will give them the false security they need to walk blindly into our trap. I opened my laptop on Nathaniel's polished mahogany desk and connected to his encrypted network. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to construct the most pathetic and desperate email of my entire professional life. It had to strike the absolute perfect balance between corporate formality and utter daughterly defeat. I opened a new message window and addressed it directly to Gregory Evans, making sure to copy my father's personal email address. I knew Richard would be demanding constant updates from his attorney, and seeing my surrender arrive in real time would feed his massive ego. Dear Mr. Evans, I typed, keeping my expression entirely flat. The temporary restraining order on my primary financial accounts has placed me in an untenable position. I am facing an imminent default on my mortgage by the end of this week. I am willing to formally discuss conceding a significant percentage of the property equity to Jamal and Brittany to satisfy my parents' demands. I only ask that I am allowed to remain in the primary residence and that the asset freeze is lifted immediately so I can pay my basic living expenses. Please consider this a formal request for settlement negotiations prior to our scheduled deposition. I simply cannot afford to fight a protracted legal battle against my own family. I turned the laptop screen toward Nathaniel. He adjusted his glasses and read the brief message. A sharp, appreciative smile touched his lips. Using the phrase untenable position is a brilliant touch, Nathaniel noted, leaning back in his chair. It feeds directly into their confirmation bias. Richard orchestrated this asset freeze specifically to break you. Reading this email will validate his entire strategy. He will look at this and see a terrified, financially ruined woman begging for mercy. Exactly, I said, hitting the send button. If I push back too aggressively right now, Gregory Evans might actually do his job and investigate my defenses. If Evans realizes I have forensic proof of Jamal's Ponzi scheme, he will immediately cancel the deposition to protect his clients from self-incrimination. We cannot allow that to happen. We need them to sit in that conference room on Wednesday morning and gleefully testify under oath. We need them feeling so incredibly victorious that they boast about controlling that laundered money on the legal record. Talkative criminals are stupid criminals, Nathaniel agreed, checking his own inbox for the copied message. Now we wait for them to swallow the hook. When people are drowning in $2 million of unregulated debt, they tend to grab at the first life preserver they see, even if it is rigged with explosives. The wait was remarkably short. My father was entirely predictable when it came to his absolute need for dominance. Less than 45 minutes later, a response pinged into my inbox. It was from Gregory Evans, but the condescending, aggressive tone had Richard written all over it. I read the email aloud to Nathaniel. Ms. Vance, my clients reject your proposal for a partial equity split. They demand the immediate and total transfer of the Buckhead property deed. However, noting your sudden willingness to cooperate, my clients are prepared to offer a final mercy agreement. We will proceed with the sworn deposition scheduled for Wednesday morning. During this deposition, you will formally acknowledge on the record that the funds used for your home purchase originated from the family business trust. Once you sign the deed over and confess to misappropriating the capital, my clients will graciously instruct me to lift the asset freeze. We expect to see you on Wednesday. I closed my laptop with a satisfying snap. They took the bait completely. They are so blinded by their own greed and desperation that they cannot see the trap, I said, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. They honestly believe I'm going to show up on Wednesday, confess to a financial crime I did not commit, and hand them a luxury estate just so I can buy groceries. They are eager to go under oath to claim that dirty money because they think it legitimizes their theft. And by claiming that laundered money under oath, they will hand the federal government a perfect signed confession, Nathaniel concluded, organizing the thick black binders on his desk. Lauren, I have seen a lot of corporate bloodbaths in my career, but the execution of this strategy is going to be genuinely historic. They are walking into a federal perjury charge with smiles on their faces. I spent the next 48 hours meticulously preparing for the absolute destruction of my family. I did not leave my house. I ordered basic meals using my obscure travel credit card, ignoring the continuous mocking text messages from my mother and sister. Brittany sent me a link to a luxury baby crib, adding a sarcastic note that it would look perfect in my master bedroom once I moved into the basement. I archived every single message, adding them to the mountain of evidence proving their malicious intent. I reviewed the blockchain forensic data until I had every transaction memorized. I memorized the exact dates my parents secured their predatory commercial loans. I memorized the exact hour those funds were transferred into Jamal's failing cryptocurrency wallets. I knew their financial sins better than they did. Jamal thought he was a crypto genius, but his digital footprints were completely amateurish. The IRS would not even need a week to build an indictment based on my findings. On Tuesday night, the eve of the deposition, I walked through the quiet, expansive rooms of my Buckhead home. The hardwood floors gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting. I ran my hand over the cool marble of the kitchen island, where my father had slapped down that fraudulent lawsuit just 4 days ago. They thought they could invade my sanctuary. They thought they could punish my independence and steal the physical manifestation of my 10 years of grueling labor. I stopped in front of the large mirror in my hallway. I looked at my reflection. There was no trace of the desperate, eager-to-please daughter who used to constantly sacrifice her own happiness to appease Richard and Susan. I was a senior financial auditor, a woman who dismantled fraudulent empires for a living. I packed the heavy black binders into my leather briefcase. I laid out my sharpest, most intimidating corporate suit. I was completely ready for war. Wednesday morning arrived with heavy rain, washing the Atlanta streets clean. I walked into the high-rise offices of Gregory Evans, wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying my leather briefcase. Nathaniel walked beside me, his expression an unreadable mask of professional detachment. We were directed into a sprawling glass conference room. My parents, Brittany and Jamal, were already seated on one side of the long, polished table. They looked incredibly smug. My mother wore a designer blouse she likely bought using Jamal's stolen crypto funds, and my father sat with his chest puffed out, radiating arrogant confidence. They genuinely believed I was showing up to surrender. At the head of the table sat the certified court reporter organizing her stenography machine. Evans looked at me with a sickeningly triumphant smile, gesturing toward the empty chairs. "Glad you decided to be sensible," Lauren Evans said smoothly. "We can wrap this up quickly. My clients will provide their sworn testimony regarding the family trust. You will formally acknowledge the debt, and we can finalize the deed transfer." I sat down and placed my briefcase on the floor. I said nothing. Nathaniel opened his legal pad and nodded to the court reporter. "We are ready to proceed on the record." The reporter asked Richard and Susan to raise their right hands. They both eagerly swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury. It was a beautiful, defining moment. They had just crossed the legal point of no return. Evans began the questioning, lobbing softball prompts to my father. Richard leaned into the microphone, projecting the image of a betrayed but loving patriarch. Mr. Vance Evans asked, "Can you please describe the nature of the checking account ending in 4402? "That is our primary family business trust." Richard lied effortlessly, his voice full of false authority. "My wife and I have used it for years to park excess revenue from our manufacturing business. We kept Lauren's name on it for convenience, trusting her to manage the administrative side since she is an auditor." "And the $300,000 withdrawn from that account last month," Evans prompted. Stolen Susan interjected, wiping an entirely fake tear from her cheek. "Lauren maliciously transferred those funds without our permission to buy her mansion in Buckhead. We told her that money was strictly reserved to buy a house for Brittany and Jamal. We deposited that cash directly into the account ourselves. We earned every single penny of it." Nathaniel did not object. He let them speak. He let them paint themselves deeper and deeper into their own corner. I sat perfectly still, my face devoid of any emotion, while my parents confidently swore under federal oath that the laundered money belonged exclusively to them. They were actively claiming ownership of the very funds Jamal had stolen from his desperate investors. Nathaniel adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, his demeanor shifting into the precise surgical mode I knew so well. Instead, he leaned forward and looked directly at my father. "Mr. Vance Nathaniel," began, his tone deceptively conversational, "just to ensure the record is absolutely clear for the court. You are testifying under oath that the massive cash deposits made into account 4402 over the past 24 months were generated entirely by your manufacturing business." "Absolutely," Richard stated proudly. "That is our hard-earned corporate revenue. Every single dollar belongs to me and my wife. And you maintain exclusive financial control over this specific capital," Nathaniel asked. "You directed these exact funds to be deposited and subsequently transferred." "Yes, I did," Richard confirmed. "I manage all family finances." Nathaniel turned his attention to my mother. "Mrs. Vance, do you corroborate your husband's testimony? You both legally claim full ownership of these specific financial transfers." "I certainly do," Susan snapped, glaring at me across the mahogany table. "We built that wealth. Lauren maliciously drained it because she is jealous of her sister. She knew Jamal and Brittany needed that money for their new baby." At the mention of her name, Brittany immediately buried her face in her hands. She let out a loud theatrical sob, ensuring the court reporter captured the full auditory impact of her manufactured grief. "It is just so incredibly cruel," Brittany wailed, peering through her fingers to check if everyone was watching her performance. "Jamal has been working day and night to build his investment firm. We are trying to create a beautiful life for our growing family. Lauren knew that house was meant for my children. She purposely stole our future just to punish me for being happy. I cannot even sleep knowing my baby might not have a safe home." Evans patted Brittany's shoulder comfortingly, shooting a disgusted look in my direction. The stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, permanently logging every single lie, every fake tear, and every fraudulent claim of ownership. Nathaniel then shifted his gaze to my brother-in-law. "And Jamal, you also affirm that these specific transfers were intended for your legitimate business expansion." Jamal smirked, adjusting his expensive tie. 100%. That was my bridging capital. Lauren tried to bankrupt me by stealing it." Nathaniel offered a polite, sympathetic nod to my crying sister before returning his razor-sharp focus to my parents. Thank you for clarifying that, Nathaniel said, his voice smooth as glass. So to be completely unequivocal before we proceed. Richard and Susan Vance, you both swear under penalty of federal perjury that the capital routed through this specific checking account is your legitimate untaxed corporate revenue, and you take full legal responsibility for its origin. We absolutely do, my father answered without a single second of hesitation. I sat perfectly still, maintaining my blank expression. Nathaniel offered a cold, satisfied smile to the room. The massive legal trap was now permanently locked. Gregory Evans leaned back in his expensive leather chair, a look of profound satisfaction settling across his slightly sweating face. He glanced at the court reporter who had just finished typing the final keystrokes of my parents' sworn testimony. Evans turned his attention to Nathaniel, expecting a desperate scramble for a defense or a frantic attempt at cross-examination. Does opposing counsel have any questions for my clients regarding their sworn statements today? Evans asked, his voice dripping with unearned condescension. Or is your client finally ready to concede the equity transfer and end this unfortunate family dispute today? Nathaniel closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive snap. He did not look at the fraudulent bank statements scattered across the mahogany table. He simply looked at Evans with an expression of mild, detached amusement. We have absolutely no further questions for your clients at this time, Nathaniel replied smoothly. Their testimony has been incredibly thorough and deeply illuminating. We waive our right to cross-examine. Evans blinked, clearly caught off guard by the total lack of resistance. He quickly masked his confusion with a triumphant smirk, assuming our silence was an admission of total unconditional defeat. He slapped his hands down on the table, signaling the end of the formal proceedings. Excellent, Evans declared, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. We will have the deed transfer documents drafted and sent to your office by tomorrow morning. I expect them signed and notarized before Friday. The court reporter officially stopped the record, packing away her stenography machine. The heavy, suffocating tension in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a sickening wave of arrogant celebration from the other side of the table. My father stood up, adjusting his tie with a look of supreme patriarchal victory. He looked down at me, his eyes full of that familiar toxic dominance I had spent my entire childhood trying to escape. You made the right choice by keeping your mouth shut today, Lauren, Richard said, his voice echoing in the emptying room. I know it hurts your pride to lose, but this is how the real world operates. You tried to be selfish and you learned a hard lesson about family loyalty. When you move your things into the basement this weekend, make sure the upstairs is professionally cleaned. Jamal and Brittany need a pristine environment for the baby. My mother walked around the table, placing a hand on my shoulder. I did not flinch, though my skin crawled at her touch. We will forgive you eventually, Susan murmured, adopting her perfect, benevolent mother persona now that she thought she had secured her multi-million-dollar prize. Just focus on paying your rent to Jamal on time. Maybe this humbling experience will teach you some much-needed humility and remind you of your place in this family. Brittany had miraculously stopped crying the exact second the court reporter went off the record. She was already scrolling through her phone, likely browsing luxury furniture catalogs. Jamal stood beside her, checking his shiny, oversized watch with a look of profound boredom. Have the keys ready by Saturday morning, Jamal instructed, not even bothering to look at me. I have contractors coming to measure the kitchen for the new marble countertops. Do not make me call the police to force you out of the property. I remained perfectly seated. I did not say a single word. I simply looked at each of them in turn, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of surrender. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel cage and lock the door from the inside. They interpreted my silence as broken submission. They saw a defeated woman who had finally been crushed by the overwhelming weight of their collective manipulation. They had absolutely no idea that my mind was rapidly calculating the mandatory minimum federal prison sentences they had just enthusiastically volunteered for. By proudly claiming ownership of the laundered cash under oath, My parents had just confessed to massive tax evasion and federal wire fraud. By swearing that his business was legitimate and using those laundered funds as leverage, Jamal had just handed the Securities and Exchange Commission a beautifully wrapped gift. They had committed perjury on a federal level, and the court reporter had documented every single syllable. They turned and walked out of the conference room, chatting animatedly about paint colors and neighborhood property values. Evans followed them looking like a lawyer who thought he had just secured the easiest victory of his career. The heavy glass door clicked shut. Nathaniel and I were completely alone in the quiet room. Nathaniel let out a long, low whistle. He opened his briefcase and carefully slid his notepad inside. "I have been practicing corporate litigation for 15 years, Nathaniel said, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "I have never in my entire life seen three people so gleefully eager to hand a prosecutor their own heads on a silver platter. They literally fought each other to claim ownership of a federal crime. They thought they were being brilliant," I replied, finally standing up and smoothing my charcoal gray suit. "They thought they found a loophole to steal my house and wash their dirty money at the exact same time. They honestly believed their own lies and they thought my silence was weakness." Nathaniel pulled out his phone, typing a rapid message to his paralegal team. "The court reporter will have the expedited certified transcript delivered to my office by tomorrow afternoon. The second I have their sworn perjury on paper, I am filing the motion for summary judgment to have their civil lawsuit thrown out. I am also preparing the official whistleblower submissions for the Internal Revenue Service." But what about the other matter? I picked up my briefcase, feeling the satisfying weight of the forensic financial dossiers inside. "The trap is fully primed," I confirmed, walking toward the large window overlooking the rainy Atlanta skyline. "My private broker called me an hour before we walked into this deposition. The limited liability company I registered last week has officially purchased the defaulted commercial debt on my parents' manufacturing business and their primary residence. We acquired the debt from their hard money lender for pennies on the dollar, because the lender assumed the foreclosure would be a lengthy legal nightmare." Nathaniel smiled, a dark, dangerous expression that perfectly matched my own. "So you are no longer just the defendant in a frivolous property dispute?" "No," I said, turning away from the window. "I am now their bank. I own their mortgage. I own their business loans. I own their entire financial existence." The rain beat aggressively against the glass windows of the high-rise, but inside I felt nothing but absolute clarity. My family had spent my entire life treating me like an expendable resource, a secondary character meant only to support their golden child. They had mocked my career, belittled my independence, and tried to strip me of my hard-earned security to cover up a massive fraud. They wanted to play a ruthless game of high-stakes finance. They wanted to destroy my life without a single ounce of mercy or hesitation. Now I was going to show them what a real financial execution looked like. We were heading to the final courtroom hearing on Friday. I was not just going to present a defense. I was going to drop an atomic bomb on their reality, and I was going to enjoy watching every single piece of their arrogant, entitled world turn to dust. "Let us go prepare the final binders," I told Nathaniel, walking toward the door. "We have a judge to educate and an empire to burn." Friday morning arrived with a suffocating humidity that hung heavy over downtown Atlanta. I walked into the Fulton County Courthouse wearing a navy blue tailored suit, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of absolute calm. Nathaniel walked beside me, pulling a heavy rolling litigation briefcase filled with the forensic binders that would permanently end this war. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B. My family was already seated at the plaintiff's table. They looked like they were attending a victory celebration rather than a highly contested legal hearing. Brittany was wearing a designer maternity dress, scrolling through her phone and whispering something to Jamal, who leaned back in his chair with his legs crossed arrogantly. Richard and Susan sat tall, projecting the image of deeply wronged, respectable business owners about to receive their rightful compensation. They genuinely believed I was showing up to surrender. Gregory Evans stood near the podium, chatting casually with the court clerk. He shot Nathaniel a deeply condescending smile as we took our seats at the defense table. Evans genuinely believed this emergency hearing was a mere formality. He thought I was here to officially surrender the deed to my Buckhead estate, agree to lift the asset freeze, and beg for the basement lease they had so graciously offered during mediation. Judge Harrison took the bench. He was an older, no-nonsense jurist, known for having absolutely zero tolerance for frivolous litigation. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the extensive docket, and sighed heavily. Your Honor, Evans began stepping up to the podium with a sickeningly confident posture. We are here to finalize the constructive trust on the Buckhead property. As demonstrated in the sworn deposition transcript submitted to the court yesterday, my clients have formally affirmed that the funds used to purchase the defendant's home were misappropriated from their joint family business account. The defendant offered absolutely no contest during the deposition. We request summary judgment and an immediate court order forcing the transfer of the deed to my clients today. Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at our table. Mr. Evans claims you offered no contest during the deposition. Do you have a formal response to this motion, counselor? Nathaniel stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not walk to the podium. He stood right at our table, projecting total, undeniable command of the room. Your Honor, we offered no contest during the deposition because we simply wanted to allow the plaintiffs to speak uninterrupted on the federal record. We are submitting our own motion for summary judgment today, requesting the immediate dismissal of this fraudulent lawsuit with extreme prejudice. Nathaniel opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 thick black binders. He handed one to the bailiff to pass to the judge and slid another across the table toward a suddenly very confused Gregory Evans. Inside that binder, Your Honor, is a certified third-party forensic audit conducted by a licensed financial investigation firm. Nathaniel stated, his voice ringing clearly across the quiet courtroom. Tab 1 contains the defendant's complete unredacted financial history for the past 10 years. You will see the exact origin of the $300,000 down payment used to secure the Buckhead property. The funds originated exclusively from my client's personal investment portfolio, which was funded entirely by her direct payroll deposits from her corporate employer. Judge Harrison flipped open the heavy binder. The courtroom was dead silent. I watched my father's smug expression falter slightly. Jamal uncrossed his legs, suddenly sitting up straight, the arrogant smirk melting off his face. You will notice, Your Honor. Nathaniel continued relentlessly that there is absolutely zero commingling of funds. My client's capital is 100% independent. The account ending in 4402, which the plaintiffs claim is a family business trust, has never once interacted with my client's primary banking or investment portfolios. The plaintiff's entire claim of a fraudulent transfer is a complete mathematical fabrication. Gregory Evans scrambled to open his copy of the binder. His eyes darted across the certified audit reports, the payroll receipts, and the wire transfer confirmations. The color rapidly drained from his face as he realized he had built an entire civil case on easily disprovable lies. Objection, Your Honor. Evans stammered, his voice lacking all its previous arrogance. We were not provided this extensive financial documentation during the standard discovery process. Because there was no discovery phase, Nathaniel shot back instantly, his voice cracking like a whip. You deliberately bypassed standard procedure by filing an emergency ex parte injunction to freeze my client's assets, claiming she was a flight risk. You rushed this hearing to force a catastrophic default on her mortgage. You demanded an expedited timeline, Mr. Evans. This is the timeline. Judge Harrison stared at the forensic audit for a long, calculating minute. He scrutinized the bank seals and the certified auditor signatures. He looked up, his gaze fixing harshly on Evans. This audit is certified and legally binding. The paper trail is completely undeniable and perfectly clear. Your clients have absolutely no financial claim to the defendant's property. The temporary restraining order on Lauren Vance's assets is lifted immediately. This constructive trust claim is entirely baseless, and the motion to transfer the deed is firmly denied. Brittany gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth in pure shock. What? No. Mom, you said the house was mine today. You promised me the nursery. Susan grabbed Brittany's arm, her face pale with horror. My father slammed his hand flat on the plaintiff table, his temper flaring uncontrollably. That is completely unacceptable. We swore under oath that the money in that account was ours. Yes, Mr. Vance, Nathaniel said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face as he turned to look directly at my father. You certainly did swear under oath. Which brings us perfectly to tab 2 of the forensic dossier, and the exact reason why my client waived her right to cross-examine you during Wednesday's deposition. The air in the courtroom suddenly grew incredibly heavy. I remained seated, my hands folded neatly on the table, watching the sheer panic begin to take root in their eyes. They had walked into this courthouse expecting to strip me of my sanctuary and leave me financially ruined. They had weaponized my identity, launched a vicious social media smear campaign, and tried to bully me into submission. But they had completely forgotten who they were dealing with. I was not the terrified daughter they could manipulate with guilt trips and screaming matches. I was a financial executioner, and I was just getting started. Nathaniel turned to the second tab of the binder and looked directly at the bench. Your Honor, the plaintiffs testified under oath on Wednesday that the $300,000 funneled through account 4402 was their legitimate corporate revenue. They legally claimed ownership of those funds on the federal record. I direct your attention to pages 40 through 60 of the audit. Those pages contain certified blockchain tracing logs and federal tax records linking those exact funds to a massive cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme operated by the plaintiff's son-in-law, Jamal. Jamal shot out of his chair as if he had been physically struck. His chair clattered loudly against the wooden floor of the courtroom. That is a complete lie, Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. She fabricated those logs. You cannot use that in a civil hearing. Sit down immediately, Judge Harrison roared, slamming his gavel down with a resounding crack. You will speak when spoken to in my courtroom, or you will wait in a holding cell. Jamal sank back into his chair, his hands visibly shaking. Brittany grabbed his arm, looking frantically between her husband and my lawyer. Nathaniel continued, completely unbothered by the outburst. The records demonstrate that Jamal is currently facing a $2.4 million federal tax lien from the Internal Revenue Service. His investment firm, Apex Digital Holdings, is entirely insolvent. He has been defrauding investors for 2 years. 3 months ago, his incoming revenue completely dried up. Desperate for liquidity, Jamal convinced his in-laws Richard and Susan Vance to completely mortgage their manufacturing business and their primary residence to bail him out. Judge Harrison quickly flipped through the pages of the audit. The color drained from his face as he processed the certified financial data. He looked at the deposition transcript from Wednesday, then looked down at my parents. Let me make sure I fully understand the gravity of what I am reading, Judge Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you took out predatory commercial loans, handed the cash to your son-in-law, and then used a dormant student checking account bearing your daughter's name to bounce the funds. And just 2 days ago, you sat in a room with a certified court reporter and swore under penalty of perjury that this laundered money was your legitimate business income. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Gregory Evans, but his lawyer was already frantically packing his briefcase, physically backing away from the plaintiff table. Evans knew a federal crime when he saw one, and he was desperately trying to sever his professional association with my family before the fallout destroyed his own career. We were just trying to protect our daughter, Susan cried out, pointing a trembling finger at Brittany. Jamal said he just needed a little bit of bridge capital. We did not know anything about a Ponzi scheme. We just wanted to make sure our new grandchild had a nice home. Lauren has plenty of money. She should have helped us. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal money laundering and perjury, Judge Harrison stated coldly. You brought a fraudulent civil case into my courtroom to steal an asset from your eldest daughter, all to cover up a massive financial crime. I am immediately forwarding this entire forensic dossier and your sworn deposition transcripts to the United States Attorney's Office and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Brittany began to sob hysterically, burying her face in Jamal's shoulder. Jamal shoved her away, standing up and pacing like a trapped animal. He pulled out his phone, likely looking for an escape route, but the bailiff placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, forcing him to remain exactly where he was. "Your Honor," Gregory Evans stammered, stepping toward the aisle. "I ask for permission to formally withdraw as counsel for the plaintiffs effective immediately. I had absolutely no knowledge of these underlying financial crimes or the fraudulent nature of the funds claimed in the deposition." "Permission granted," Judge Harrison snapped. "Get out of my courtroom, Mr. Evans." As Evans practically ran out the heavy wooden doors, my father slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The arrogant, controlling patriarch was completely gone. In his place was a ruined, terrified man who finally realized his golden child and her husband had dragged him into absolute destruction. "Lauren, please," my father begged, turning to look at me with tear-filled eyes. "You have to help us. You are a financial auditor. You know people. You can explain this to the federal authorities. We will lose everything. The bank is going to foreclose on the manufacturing plant and the house. We will be living on the street." I stood up slowly, picking up a single sheet of paper from my defense table. I walked around Nathaniel and stepped directly in front of my parents. I looked down at them with absolute, unwavering clarity. "You are not going to lose your house to the bank," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. A brief, pathetic glimmer of hope flashed across my mother's face. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. "You paid off the debt. You saved our house. I knew you would not let your family become homeless, Lauren." I pulled my hand back, stepping out of her reach. I slid the single piece of paper across the plaintiff table. It was not a receipt of payment. It was a formal notice of default and transfer of lien. "I did not pay off your debt," I corrected her, my tone dropping to an icy chill. "I purchased your debt. 2 days ago, my private broker finalized the acquisition of the commercial loans you took out from your hard money lender. I used a newly formed limited liability company to buy the defaulted notes on your manufacturing business and your primary residence for pennies on the dollar. The lender was thrilled to offload your toxic debt." Richard stared at the document, his eyes widening in pure horror as he read the name of my holding company listed as the primary creditor. "What does that mean?" Brittany whimpered, looking frantically between our parents. "What did she do?" "It means I am your new bank," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with my father. "I own the mortgage on the house you live in. I own the liens on the business you built. You tried to use a fraudulent lawsuit to steal my $1.5 million home so you could sell it and save yourselves. You tried to frame me for federal money laundering. So I bought your debt, and I am officially executing my right to foreclose on all of your properties. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. And do not bother asking to live in my basement. That space is reserved for people I actually respect." I turned my back on them and walked confidently back to the defense table. Behind me, the sound of my mother's agonizing, desperate sobbing filled the entire courtroom. The trap had not just snapped shut. It had completely obliterated everything they had ever built. Judge Harrison absolutely did not waste a single second. He motioned to the court bailiff, who immediately approached the plaintiff table and instructed Jamal to stand up and place his hands behind his back. Jamal tried to resist his loud, expensive suit, suddenly looking completely ridiculous as he sputtered panicked excuses about needing to call a criminal defense attorney. 2 federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division, who had been waiting right outside the courtroom doors, stepped inside to officially take Jamal into custody. They read him his Miranda rights right there in the aisle. Brittany screamed, dropping to her knees and grabbing the fabric of Jamal's trousers, begging the federal agents to let him go because she was pregnant and needed her husband. The agents professionally ignored her theatrics, clicking the heavy steel handcuffs shut and marching the failed cryptocurrency mastermind out of the courtroom. The facade of his elite investment brand was permanently shattered. He was just another common thief being hauled away to face decades in federal prison. My parents sat completely frozen at the table, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their immediate, inescapable ruin. They had gambled their entire 30-year legacy on a flashy con artist, and the house always wins. I did not stay to watch them cry. Nathaniel and I packed our briefcases, nodded respectfully to Judge Harrison, and walked out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The storm clouds had finally broken, leaving the city bright and washed entirely clean. I felt like I could finally take a full deep breath for the first time in my entire life. 30 days passed with absolute merciless precision. I did not bluff about my timeline. The limited liability company I registered executed the foreclosure on my parents' manufacturing business and their sprawling suburban home simultaneously. My private broker handled the evictions, ensuring I never had to physically interact with them. On the 31st day, the sheriff department arrived at their property to enforce the lockout. Richard and Susan, the arrogant, controlling patriarch and the superficial status-obsessed matriarch, were forced to pack whatever clothes they could fit into garbage bags and leave the premises. Their country club memberships were revoked. Their wealthy social circle vanished instantly, utterly disgusted by the public revelation that they had tried to frame their own daughter for federal money laundering. Brittany suffered an equally devastating reality check. Without Jamal's stolen funds to finance her luxurious lifestyle, her entire social media influencer persona collapsed overnight. The federal government seized all of her designer handbags, her leased luxury vehicles, and her frozen bank accounts to help pay back the victims of the Ponzi scheme. She was forced to move into a cheap, cramped motel room on the outskirts of the city, relying entirely on state assistance to prepare for her new baby. The glamorous golden child dynamic that my parents had worshipped for 3 decades was completely annihilated. The desperate attempts to contact me began exactly 1 week after the evictions. Despite the strict no-contact orders established by my legal team, they found ways to leave pathetic, groveling voicemails from prepaid burner phones. My father left a 3-minute audio message sobbing into the receiver, begging for financial mercy. He claimed his health was failing due to the stress and that he just needed a small loan to get back on his feet. My mother left countless texts pleading for access to my Buckhead mansion. She actually had the audacity to ask if the 3 of them could move into my finished basement, promising they would stay completely out of my way and keep the space clean for Brittany's baby. They were literally begging for the exact same humiliating living arrangement they had tried to force upon me during our mediation session. I listened to their voicemails once, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold clinical detachment. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not reply. I forwarded every single communication log directly to Nathaniel, who immediately filed for permanent legally binding restraining orders against all 3 of them. I changed my personal phone number, upgraded my corporate security protocols, and instructed my gated community guards to immediately arrest them for trespassing if they ever came within a mile of my neighborhood. I severed the toxic, diseased branch of my family tree with a surgical precision that left absolutely no room for future infection. They were permanently blocked, legally banished, and completely erased from my reality. 6 months later, I hosted a real housewarming party. The autumn air in Atlanta was crisp and cool. The patio of my beautiful, fully paid-off estate was glowing under soft amber string lights. The catered food was exquisite, and the jazz music floated effortlessly through the vaulted ceilings of my home. My guests were my real family. They were my trusted colleagues, my brilliant legal team, and the loyal friends who had supported me during the darkest hours of my life. Nathaniel raised a glass of expensive champagne from across the kitchen island, offering a silent, triumphant toast to our incredible victory. I had survived a brutal, malicious ambush orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to protect me. They tried to break my spirit, steal my hard-earned wealth, and throw me to the federal wolves to save themselves. But they fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I did not just survive their betrayal. I utilized their own greedy, reckless ambition to completely dismantle their empire. Family is not an automatic license for exploitation. Blood does not give anyone the right to demand your financial ruin. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is looking at the toxic people holding you back completely, destroying their leverage, and walking away without a single drop of regret. I took a deep, satisfying breath of the cool evening air, feeling completely at peace in the beautiful, impenetrable fortress that I had built entirely on my own.